And we are live. Hi, everybody. Welcome this evening to our episode of Reinvention Works Conversations from the Front Porch on June 24th, 2015. This evening's guest is Debbie Muller. She is the CEO of the company she founded called HR Acuity, and I'm going to give her a second to say hello and welcome herself to our program. Say hi, Debbie.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Hal.
Yay. So, Debbie, what we're going to do is tell the audience about the housekeeping and how this will flow, and then we'll move into you giving some background on how you ended up doing what you're doing today and where your past was from. So, let's first give some housekeeping. First of all, Reinvention Works is a destination for all things reinvention. It's designed to empower people and businesses to take control of their next future with tools, networking, education, and marketplace. And these webcasts are live and they're intended to inform, instruct, and motivate folks to pursue their own next future. So we hope you agree. And what we want to do is there'll be a 30-minute interview or so. We're going to wrap it up and offer Q&A time. In order to submit your Q&A, audience, what you want to do is move your mouse up to the left-hand corner. You'll see a little Q&A icon, and that's where you can type your questions if you have any questions for Deb. I would like to ask you to hold off on those questions until the very end, and when I open up the floor, then we can pose those questions. I hope you're comfortable because I sure am. I have my glass of wine this evening, which is tonight I'm drinking a Chateau Saint Michel Riesling 2013. It's a very uncomplicated, easy drinking wine. It is sort of fruity, sort of chalky. They market it as medium sweet. It's got a really great price point. Should be anywhere between $6 and $10. And it's got an alcohol of 11.9, so it's not too difficult on the body to have a nice full glass. Deb, what are you drinking this evening?
So funny you should ask, Hal. And I'm just going to go into, I have my favorite evening, morning, and mid-afternoon drink. I'm drinking a Tab. Now, how many of you on the line are now saying, I didn't know they still made that? Or even worse, you might be saying, my grandmother used to drink that, which I don't really like to hear a lot. Anyways, this is my drink of choice, and yes, I still make it. It's not from the 1970s, but it's a wonderful beverage. I don't even know how to explain the flavor because it's just, it is, It's
Deb, how long have you been drinking Tab?
Since I was probably in junior high or high school. Diet Coke came out in high school, and I was so excited, and I tasted it, and I hated it. So it's a little weird to find.
The lesson learned here is that though reinvention involves change, sometimes significant change, you have to hold on to a couple of things that are your core.
It
like
is
your
my
Tab.
identity. That's right. It's my identity. I know if I ever have a Tab and I leave it out or don't throw it away, someone's going to know who had it. So there's recycling.
All right. Well, now that we established that groundwork, I'm going to give you a chance to tell your story. So why don't you, in about 5 minutes or less, tell us a little history about what did you go to school for? What did you want to be when you grew up? How did your career go? And how did you wind up where you are today?
Well, I wanted to be a vet when I grew up, but that's a totally other story.
Oh, there's still time.
I'm a vet, an artist, probably. But I went to school at Cornell for industrial and labor relations. And at that time, you kind of had I don't know if it's changed, but most people either went to law school, which I knew I did not want to do, or they went into human resources, or sometimes affectionately known at the time as personnel. I was just kind of making that switch, thank goodness. So I went into human resources and spent about 20 years in a variety of organizations, doing a variety of different HR type roles, different organizations. As a matter of fact, not to digress, but somewhere in between there, I had my first reinvention where I decided to become a teacher, went back to grad school, became an elementary school teacher, and decided, no, I really want to do HR. So that one didn't work so well. So I did HR for about 20 years and knew that while I liked doing what I was doing, I didn't like the corporate thing. I didn't see myself as a head of HR at any company. Along the way, I acquired a husband and 3 boys, which made life a little bit more complicated, but I wanted to be able to manage it all. And, I was at a job and I didn't love it. And lucky for me, they were going through some changes, and my role was eliminated. And just a funny story is, my husband along the way knew I wasn't happy at the job. He knew that, things weren't going so well. And really, I wanted to have my job eliminated. And one day he came home, and I was home, and I came to the top of the stairs where he was coming in from. And I looked at him and I said, "It's over." And he kind of paused, and he's like, paused for a second. He looked at me and goes, "The job, right?" And I said, "Yeah, the job, not us." So I was fortunate enough to have my job eliminated and have a pretty generous severance package. So I had an opportunity to do something different. I knew I wanted to do something different, and I knew I wanted to go out on my own. And I started thinking about what I would do, what I was going to do with HR. And everybody said to me, "Why don't you become an HR consultant? You've done so many things in HR. You could go and you can consult." And I said to myself, yeah, but I've spent my career paying other people to be consultants and to do all the things I didn't want to do myself. So why would I go and then make that my career? Because that sounds pretty miserable. So along the way, one of my bosses, I had done a lot of investigations into allegations of harassment or theft or other types of misconduct, discrimination. And one of my bosses, as I was telling her about an investigation I was doing, looked at me and she said, "You really like doing these, don't you?" And it really made me pause. And I kept kind of coming back to that conversation that I did like doing them. It was a part of my job that, came up every now and again. I got more complex investigations because I got better at them, and more senior level investigations. And I also recognized there was a need for that in the marketplace. So I decided that that's what HR Acuity was going to be. We were going to be a provider of third-party workplace investigations, and that was going to be my business model. And yes, I did create a business plan. And every once in a while I pull it up just to get a chuckle. And I set off on that. So that was my plan. That was my business. And that was how it was going to start. So I started HR Acuity as a service provider, and with my plan, knowing exactly what I was going to do. And along the way, clients or prospective clients that I spoke to would say to me, "Well, that's great. We would love to use you when we need you. But we really need a better way to manage employee relations, to manage investigations internally. Tell us more about your process. Can we use your proprietary methodology?" And I, having never been in sales before, would say, oh no, it's proprietary. You need to use me. And they would keep asking me, and I'd keep saying, no, it's proprietary. And then eventually that 2x4 that was hitting me over the head started to hurt a little bit more. And I started to listen. And so a very large telecommunications company asked me about that. And I said, okay, I'm working on licensing it. And I had no idea what that meant. But that was a good answer. And and so that was what I was going to do. And so I went home and I decided, well, how am I going to do this? It's kind of my process is on paper. What am I going to do? And it was a web company, a web-based digital company. And we were right, it was 2006, right after the, everybody was doing things on the web. And I said, I'm going to take my process and put it on the web. I'm going to webify it. And so I started drawing my website on PowerPoint because I was really good at PowerPoint. I had really bad administrative support in my career, so I learned to be very good at it. And I drew a login screen. I also had the luxury of having been a user of really crappy software, right? So I knew what I didn't want it to do. So my criteria was it was going to work. And I was going to make it do what I said it was going to do, and it was user-friendly. So I drew the login screen. I drew the next screen, and it's really amazing that you can make your website so functional on paper. I mean, you can make it do these wild, crazy things. So I put it together, and then I got a focus group together, and my focus group consisted of friends, HR generalists, lawyers, HR leaders, all around my dining room table. I got a big platter of sushi. I think we used my son's Zuma projector thingy majig to project my PowerPoint on the wall. And I showed it to them. You can see I knew a lot about technology, the Zuma thing that I was using at that point. And they all thought it was a great idea. And they all said, I really think this is something we need. And that was my market research that evening. And I said to my husband, okay, look, I think I'm going to take the business in a kind of a different direction. I'm going to develop this website, and everybody makes tons of money really quickly when they do a website. I think it'll take about 6 months. I have some money set aside, a small amount of money. And he said, okay.
And
And
like just to fast forward to where we are today, is that kind of close to that? Like, is that the turning point?
yeah, I mean, I'll tell you the truth. So there was a launch of the business. And the two biggest things I learned about that was that software takes a lot more money than you think, and that I have a very supportive husband.
Yeah. I mean, both of those things are really.
That's where I got HR Acuity really became a technology company, an HR technology company, which, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, what I would be doing, I think vet would have been higher on the list than CEO of a technology company.
Right. Interesting. So that kind of answers actually a lot of questions. So let's back up a bit and just get your opinion broadly on the topic of reinvention.
Yeah.
For example, when I approached you about sharing your reinvention story, you kind of had to think about it because you didn't perceive yourself as a reinventionist. So, but you just said probably I'd be more likely to be a vet. So, what do you perceive of as reinvention?
Well, I think it's taking a turn. It's not just kind of going on the typical career ladder that you're kind of supposed to go on or that you expect you're going to go on from point A to point B. It's really having the courage, or maybe not, maybe just taking the risk to take a turn for whatever reason. Maybe it's because you don't like what you're doing. Maybe because you have just different circumstances that force you to do that. But doing something totally different that isn't kind of that traditional, kind of graduated step in your career.
And, yours wasn't necessarily deliberate because you were eager to get out of that job that you weren't happy at. And you were presented with an opportunity. And then it was like, I think of yours, as you describe it, as a little bit more opportunistic. So the opportunity was that somebody kind of made you see the light at what you were good at, and then you decided to pursue that as a business, and then you created this business, but that wasn't what the market wanted. And then you said, like, the 2x4, I've had that experience too. So it's not necessarily that you had like some eureka moment, like, hey, there's the need for this technology, other than you created the idea, you saw the demand, and then you had your flash of inspiration when the market told you to.
Right.
So what did you learn from that?
Well, first of all, I think one of the things I learned, which I continue to apply, or I try to apply in the company, is you really got to keep your ears open. You really got to listen, and you really have to be willing to kind of take a turn and change directions quickly. And that's one of the things, I struggle with, but I'm also doing well, kind of back and forth depending on the day in the company, particularly in a small company. So I think that plays out over and over, as you build your business, just to have that flexibility.
And would you have previously thought of yourself as a risk taker?
No. And I was thinking about that before the call, and I'm actually pretty conservative. Personally, I don't go down hills. I don't ski. I'm, I'm in the car. I'm a backseat driver. So
you're elected to manage money.
That's right. I do the money, the family, kind of low risk. Yet in my business, I find myself just saying, let's just do it. Like, let's just do it. Like, what's the worst that can happen? And I kind of have to be that way. And it's because what is the worst that can happen?
Well, a lot of things could happen. So that's very interesting.
Right.
You Jekyll and Hyde you. I mean, so that is interesting, because do you think that this is a dichotomy that exists because you have to be more risk open than in your personal life, or have you like kind of forced yourself to be more less fearful?
I don't know. It's funny because personally I'm just not risky, but at running this company, I find myself willing to kind of step out on the limb a little bit more. I mean, I hope they're educated risks, and I feel like there's some backing, but again, I can't, you can't wait around. It's that 80-20 rule. You got to just go for it and make a decision and move on, which is actually one of the joys about running your own business as well.
Yeah, that's true too. So did any of those like kind of risky or just decisive decisions backfire?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I am, and I'll say this confidently, I'm the CEO of a technology company, right? So very weird for me to say, but that is what I am, and I'm accepting it and owning it. But I've made some technology decisions that maybe weren't the best. I decided to kind of we were going to rewrite our solution, and went down a path and spent a lot of money going down a path. And then realized it wasn't the right path, and basically lost a lot of money we'd invested. I learned a lot from it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you gotta kind of say, okay, it happened, and move on. I can't dwell on it, but I learned from it.
Right. And what about the aspect of risk and reinvention and like lessons learned from failure and, lessons learned from success? What have you learned from reinventing yourself?
I have to think about it. First of all, I have to take some time to think about it. But when I do think about it, I build this confidence, right? That I'm pretty proud of what I've done. But, one of the things about lessons learned and what I would tell other people is you got to take the time to do that, because it's so easy to get wrapped up in everything and not to kind of realize that you've already done things along the way you should be celebrating. So you got to kind of think back and say, hey, this, good for you. And I don't do that enough. A lot of times I have to have other people tell me, and I'll be like, oh, no, it's not a big deal. And they'll be like, what do you mean it's not a big deal? You develop this tool, you have, a company, and I'll have to kind of say, oh, I guess you're right. People don't do that every day, do they?
Right.
Yeah.
One of the other guests that I interviewed talked about the book, The Confidence Code. And I know that some other women, even in the audience now, have been reading that book. They say that that's helpful. And that's kind of one of the things. But you mentioned earlier that you have a very supportive husband. Was he instrumental in terms of, kind of getting you going on this path and being your cheerleader? And was anybody else?
So he's been very supportive just by not questioning. You know what I mean? I mean, so many other people could say, what are you doing? Like, really? I mean, for so many years when I didn't see a dime of the money, there was nothing, and little does he know the money I was taking out and then secretly putting back in, you get to pay other people. So, I don't know if he's watching, but anyway, but it's back. So it doesn't matter. And now there's some money coming in. So he just, the late night, he doesn't question. The travel, he doesn't question. If he has to pick he is so supportive with our kids, and my kids are really supportive. And, I have 3 boys, and I think it's great for them to see me. And I think they're really proud to come to my office. One of my kids does his homework here, and I love that. I love for them to see a woman, their mom, doing all of this. And so that's great. But as far as other people, there have been so many people that have helped me. And the one thing, I always tell people when they start a business, when they do something different, when they're looking for a new job, I tell them they're going to be surprised. They're going to go out and they're going to kind of create a list of all the people they know in their network that they think are going to help them. And very few of those people are going to help them. It's going to be the other person's friend who they met on the sidewalk or they kind of hardly know, who is going to go out of their way for them and help them. And everybody comes back and says, you're right. And so I do have had a lot of people that have been very supportive, but there's been some people who just surprisingly have been so supportive. And I've learned a lot from that. I think it's a certain type of person. And because of that experience, I've tried to become that person.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's also kind of like make sure that you're helping other people at the same time that you're the recipient of that help. So Deb, take us back to some of these early days when, you had this idea for a business. It hadn't come to fruition yet, and you were being clunked on the head. What was your emotional roller coaster like? How did you stay motivated?
I think I just, I've been working forever. Like I'm just one of those people that had worked since I was 14, Dunkin' Donuts. And so I'd never thought it wasn't going to work, which is kind of crazy when I think pretty crazy, and when I think about kind of where I started, okay, so I have this PowerPoint. Well, put together business requirements for a developer. Well, what kind of developer do I need? All right, so I wrote business requirements, but for not really business requirements, and found a developer in Romania. And then so when I think about it, it's crazy. But the reality is, I just kept, I mean, that's just, who I am. I probably should have had more emotions. I don't know, but
You had like unwavering self-belief.
I guess,
That's
but
great.
wow. Now I think back and maybe I shouldn't have, but it all worked out. Or worked out.
And what would have been your plan B?
Well, I still did consulting and I could still do, and I always thought I could still get a job. I kept telling myself at any point, this isn't working. I did feel comfortable with my network that I could go get an HR job, and do the same thing I was doing before. Although there was a point where, it would have been harder to turn that off. I mean, there was a point when we first went to production and we had a handful of clients. And I remember like a great job offer coming through and my husband would be like, don't you? I'm like, I have clients. Like, I can't just, what am I going to just tell them I've thrown in the towel and everything I told them about how great this wasn't true? My integrity was then kind of attached to it. And for me, there was no looking back.
Right, right. So, you have a kind of unique personality, this unwavering self-belief and this Jekyll and Hyde risk aversion, not risk averse. What if you try to put yourself in other people's shoes who may not have that kind of personality and that they're thinking about reinventing and they're in the beginning, just like you were in the beginning, what kind of advice would you give them? What specific things might they do?
So if you have a plan for what you want to do, I think you need to hold yourself accountable, right? It's very easy, and I did this, to find yourself doing the things you like to do or that are easy. So I remember once spending so much time trying to figure out the name for my product, right? The name and the logo, and like spending hours, like it really mattered, and it just wasn't that important. Like it was easy, it was fun, and it kept me away from kind of the bigger, more strategic issues I really had to deal with, like getting the product out and getting customers for the product. So hold yourself accountable and kind of say, here's what I'm going to accomplish in a set period of time, and then just make yourself do it. I think that's really important. The other thing I think I said before is celebrate the small things. Like, don't wait until, you're, on the stock exchange, whatever. Don't wait until you hit your first million, really like find some milestones and make sure you celebrate them. Sometimes, we'll have a new client and I would have, in the early days, I'd be like, okay, we have a new client, but what about all these things? I'm like, wait a second, we have to celebrate. We just got this great client, so let's celebrate that. So I think that's really important too. And the other thing is you need to invest in yourself. So typically when you do this, you don't have a lot of money and you're pouring all your money into the business or what you want to do. And you really have to remember that, first of all, you have to stay healthy. Like, don't sacrifice in hard hours, like spend some time on yourself. This might sound materialistic, but buy yourself one good outfit so you feel really great when you're going out and doing whatever you're doing. And I always tell people, buy a really good stapler and don't waste money on a shredder. I love my good stapler. It's one of those heavy duty ones. It doesn't get jammed. It'll staple like 50 pieces together, right? And I bought so many shredders. They break, they make a mess. You take your stuff and you bring it down to the UPS store. They put it in the box and you pay for it.
That is everybody, you're never going to hear that piece of advice again.
I'm going to tell you, but it's so
Invest in a good stapler.
A good stapler, and they're not that expensive.
Right. Swing line.
Swing line, $20-$30.
So Deb, I hope you don't mind, but you shared with me earlier that you're an introvert.
Mm-hmm.
And that being introverted makes it difficult for you, especially since you run a company. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit before we run out of time. We have about 4 minutes, and we don't need to talk 4 minutes about introverts, but we do have time. And I think that since this topic hasn't come up before, I would like to explore it. So tell us about what it feels like to be an introvert going through reinvention and reinventing into the boss of a company that A, doesn't exist yet, and B, then has to hire people and do all the selling.
It's hard. It's hard when you have to network and you have to sell. And I would rather just sit in my office and put my head down and work as opposed to making those tough calls. And at the beginning, you really have to do it. Yeah, I mean, you always have to do it. And particularly me, I am the face of my company. I still am the domain expert in my company. I've become, I mean, I hate to say it, but I've heard people talk about me, oh, Debbie Muller, the leader in employee relations, which is what I want. But I'm like, really? So you have to, again, it's holding yourself accountable, and you have to push yourself to do things you don't want to do. And sometimes it's realizing that you don't want to do them. So, one of the things that has helped me is when I was younger, I did a lot of theater. So I put on a show, and I know I'm going to a sales conference. I play a role, and I kind of pump myself up before I go into a sales meeting and how I'm going to behave. And I have that to fall on. That's been really helpful. Fortunately, I now have a sales team, so I still am there, but I'm not alone, and I let them do all the kind of schmoozing, and then I'm kind of just standing there, and I'm writing
yeah.
these.
Yeah.
So that's very helpful, but you really have to understand who you are. So kind of understanding, are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? How is that going to play into what you're trying to accomplish, and how are you going to compensate for that, as well as any development need you might have?
And do you think that reinvention is for everybody?
I don't know. I mean, I would hate to think that people are going to do the same thing their whole life, that there's more than one thing that people can be good at. And it may be okay for people just to do the one thing, but I think anybody can reinvent themselves. They don't have to. But I know a lot of people that are not happy in what they do, and they're on a path, and they stay on that path, maybe because they have obligations, whether they're financial obligations or otherwise. And it's sad because you spend so much time at work. I love my job. I love coming to work. I love my office. And I can't imagine doing anything else. I think, I wish, although it's not the case, that everybody could have the same passion for what they do every day.
Right. And so when you, if you hadn't lost your job, you still walked away from other opportunities because you said, I can always get a job. You had a reputation in the industry. Did you even think for a minute about buyer's remorse?
Yeah. I mean, there were times when I thought, God, well, when I wasn't getting a paycheck for 5 years, you realize it would really be nice if someone just deposited money into my account every other week. So financially, it was tough. And that's probably the biggest thing, but I didn't have to, I traveled, but if I had continued on, I probably would have had to do a lot of international travel. And quite frankly, when I left my job, I'm trying to think, 2006, my oldest was about to enter middle school. And so my youngest is almost out of middle school. So, I got to have a lot more flexibility, not less work, but more flexibility. And I remind myself, I had a friend at the beginning, and I'd say, I should have just gotten a job. She'd say, but you were at home, you were working, but you were around. So it kind of all works out. You have those pluses and minuses.
That's great. So one last question, and then I want to open up the floor for Q&A. What would you say to people who might have these dreams, these aspirations to reinvent, may even be exploring it right now, but, are questioning their fortitude, are questioning, can I go 5 years without a paycheck? Can I, what would you advise them? What would you say to them? For real, like not just like these empty promise kind of words, but,
What would I say to them for real? I think you have to have the fortitude, right? You can't just go into it half-heartedly. You can't do it halfway. You might want to do a little more research than I did. And I always give people a lot of credit that really go in and research the market. I'm like, wow, maybe I should have done that. But talk to people. Try to network with people. There are people out there that want to talk that have done similar things. Ask them, how they listen to things like this, get suggestions. And then know what you don't know, and start to build a team around you to help you. I mean, I knew what I wasn't good at. I knew early on someone had said, oh, you should get a board of advisors. I was like, oh, I know how to do all this. But when I jumped into the technology area, I knew I needed to get support to do it.
Right. That's great advice. Excellent. Well, now it's time for the audience Q&A. So I hope that some folks have some questions out there for Debbie Muller. Is anybody there? You put your question in the little question icon box at the upper left-hand corner of your screen, and I will read it off for Debbie. So let's see if we've got any. Oh, no, I don't think this is going to be working tonight because of the unexpected third party. So I'll tell you what, folks, really sorry for the live technical obstacle that we're having, but A, you get to leave earlier. B, if you do have questions for Debbie, please email them to us at webcasts@reinventionworks.com. I will make sure that Debbie gets them and answers them, and then I will distribute them to you folks who are here tonight. I'm really sorry for the technical glitch we're having. So before we close out, Deb, I want to make sure that the audience really understands what it is that you do, and if there's anything you want to ask of the audience, that the audience can help you.
Ooh, okay, so what do we do? So we are a web-based solution. HR Acuity is a web-based solution that helps companies mitigate risk associated with employee relations issues. So employee behaviors, and that's through better documentation, better analytics, and better comprehensive management of the issues. So if any of you are interested in learning more about it, obviously visit our website. And that's what I would ask you to do. Just learn more about it.
Any industries or any verticals in particular?
We do a lot of work in healthcare and in higher education. We've been, although we have, I always say that no company, no size, no industry is immune to employee misbehavior. It's happening everywhere.
That is absolutely true. Okay, so folks, I'm going to now let you see the end of this PowerPoint, and we'll see what's up tomorrow. Here's how you can get a hold of Debbie directly. She was gracious enough to share her contact information with us all, so you can contact her directly at dmuller@hracuity.com, or her URL is www.hracuity.com. For us and our future webcasts, the URL is reinventionworks.com/webcasts. You can go there. You can subscribe to the newsletter if you're not getting it. You can tell your friends to go to it. This is always the date and time of our event is Wednesdays at 8:30 p.m. So our next guest is Steve DiFilippo. He is a kind of reverse reinventionist. He started out as a professional studio musician. A lot of people wish that they were studio musicians and want to reinvent to become one. And following a really interesting course and a love of technology, he became a digital marketer and eventually a CIO of higher education. So Deb, maybe we should introduce you to Steve. And if you happen to be the social media savvy type and like to tweet or Instagram or any place else, Facebook with hashtag, you can do hashtag reinventionworks. So without further ado, I thank you all for coming. I thank you, Deb, for being my guest tonight. And I know it was another great episode. So I hope everybody tunes in next week. And in the meantime, I will say adieu. Bye, Deb. Bye, audience. See you next week.